VJ, everyone wants to know. I'm going to put you on the spot. Where are we in the adoption cycle for our audio listeners? This I have a chart pulled up. It's called the penetration of target market. And there's a line. There's an S curve. It goes from early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards, right? And then as time progresses. So where do you think we are? Can I tell you where I think we are? And then I would love to get your answer as well.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
of
I,
course.
I think we are in between. I think we've definitely left the early adopter stage. And I think we're in the very beginning or somewhat beginning of the early majority stage. What about yourself?
I I think I would agree. I was gonna use my finger to point on the picture that I see on my screen, but I would have pointed at the exact point where it crosses early adopters to early majority. I do think we're still close to early adopters, because if you just look at the numbers, like global adoption, how many people own Bitcoin, it is in that ballpark. It's not like 30 or 40% of people around the world own Bitcoin, or even 20%. It's closer to 10%. So I do think just numerically, closer to the early adopter stage. I also believe, though, in the next two cycles, we're going to move very squarely into the early majority phase of Bitcoin's adoption. Um, and that's when I think Bitcoin is going to start feeling more like gold in terms of being an established store of value. And what I mean by that is that people's perception of Bitcoin's permanence will change. People will start to think of Bitcoin as a permanent institution in the world, just in the same way that they do about the internet, right? And that process took for the internet, in my view, it took about 2 decades. If you go to the end of the first decade of the internet, it was the early 2000s, and most people were still not really sure what the value proposition of the internet was, and what is this email thing, and why is it useful. But if you skip ahead another decade to 2010, then you had things like Facebook, YouTube, Google Maps, the iPhone. I mean, it was incredibly clear that the internet was a profound change to the world, to the global economy, the way we do everything, and that it would affect every industry. So Bitcoin's only existed for about a decade. I think it'll take another decade before people are like, oh, this isn't going to go away. And you'll have a whole generation of people who are just starting to enter the workforce, who will be in their 20s, for whom Bitcoin has existed their whole life. And so for them, Bitcoin really will be a permanent institution. They've never known a world without Bitcoin. Uh, but I think this is the decade where Bitcoin will really be the real test will come. Is it going to get to the point where it gets full political capture? Does it become a permanent institution in the world? And how a nation state's going to react when they lose control of monetary policy? All of these things, I think, are going to play out in the next decade. So it's going to be a really first decade of Bitcoin was really exciting and crazy, and so many, like every week there's another crazy story. But I think the next decade is going to be even more interesting than the last.
I 100% agree. And we had this benefit though in the first, and I guess I'm privileged enough. I was lucky enough to, get in the first decade. Um, we were flying under the radar, man. They just left us alone because
Yep.
they didn't care. It didn't matter, right? And now you're seeing these reports, man. The White House report on the digital assets framework. VJ, could you believe that the Treasury released a report called "The Future of Money," and that entire report they did not mention Bitcoin one time? In the eyes of the U.S. Treasury, the future of money is central bank digital currencies, and they mentioned stable coins, but Bitcoin was not mentioned. And I think the signal in that report, VJ, was they're always making the argument people want more efficient payments, but they never mention that people just are tired of being debased. It's inflation that's the problem. And I thought
Yeah.
that was fascinating.
Yeah, and now I think we've finally gotten to the point where people are sick and tired of inflation, and it's really affecting their lives. And people are starting to understand the value of a store of value that can't be debased. Uh, Now, people criticize that claim and say, Bitcoin has dropped a lot since its all-time high, but it's in the process of monetization. This process of monetization is not a smooth linear ride that, you know, takes you from zero to a multi-trillion-dollar asset without bumps along the way. Eventually it will smooth out. Eventually it will have volatility closer to gold, and I think, you know, in the decades to come, even less than gold. But it is interesting that I think that's a problem. And I mentioned this in the article. One of the biggest failures of modern monetary economics is to view money as primarily a medium of exchange rather than as a store of value. And these are both functions that money plays. It's a medium of exchange and a store of value. But governments have essentially destroyed the store of value use case of money, and they destroy it by constantly debasing. And they think that's a good thing because they think that makes people want to spend more money, and people spending money is the health of the economy. That's a very Keynesian economics take on what makes for a healthy economy. The Austrian economics take is that it is savings. It's the accumulation of capital and the deployment of capital into productive enterprises, which is the health of the economy. That building a new factory is what makes us all richer, not spending money like crazy and going out and buying, you know, fast cars and granite countertops. It's the increase in production in an economy, and you only get an increase in production with an increase in savings. So what I think we need is a money that encourages savings, and that's precisely what Bitcoin is. And anyone who has owned Bitcoin for the last, you know, few years knows that it can have a transformative uh, um, it can be transformative on individuals as well. Like, people start saving in Bitcoin and they realize, well, there's a fixed supply of this. And because there's a fixed supply, I want to get as many of these as possible. So I'm going to stop spending as much as I usually do. I'm going to put away some more money and use that to accumulate more Bitcoin, because in the long term, there's only 21 million. And eventually, when it becomes money, as I think it will, as more people recognize this, the power of this truth, then the fraction that I have is going to grow in value. And this has turned so many people I know into savers who were never savers. So I think it has a transformative effect on both the individual and the economy as a whole.